Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical speculation that gets walked back by morning. At precisely 0347 hours Zulu time, the most catastrophic single strategic event in the history of modern Middle Eastern power dynamics became irreversible fact. Iran has just taken delivery of 500 fully operational Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles from the Russian Federation, a transfer so massive, so destabilizing, and so unprecedented in the entire history of strategic weapons proliferation that every calculation, every assumption, and every defensive architecture that has governed regional security for the past 4 decades has been rendered completely obsolete in a single night. 500 Topol-M systems, not shoulder-fired rockets, not tactical battlefield missiles, not theater-range weapons with limited operational reach. We are talking about road-mobile intercontinental ballistic missiles with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle capability, thermonuclear warhead compatibility, and global strike range exceeding 11,000 kilometers. This is hardware that was designed at the absolute pinnacle of Russian strategic rocket forces engineering to penetrate American missile defense architectures and deliver civilization-ending payloads against hardened command bunkers and strategic infrastructure on another continent. And Iran now possesses this capability in quantities that dwarf the entire ground-based strategic nuclear delivery inventory of most nuclear powers on Earth. The number that Iran has just received from Moscow exceeds the total quantity of ICBMs currently deployed by France, the United Kingdom, and Pakistan combined. This is not incremental capability enhancement. This is not evolutionary military development. This is revolutionary transformation of regional power projection, executed in absolute secrecy until the moment of completion. Western intelligence communities are in catastrophic scramble mode right now, trying to understand how a transfer of this magnitude occurred without detection, without warning, and without any opportunity for diplomatic or military intervention. Israel has been given 48 hours to make decisions that will determine whether the state survives in recognizable form or becomes a footnote in the history of civilizational collapse under overwhelming strategic pressure. The countdown is not theoretical. It is operational. Iranian Supreme Command has communicated through multiple diplomatic and military channels that the 48-hour window represents the final opportunity for Israeli leadership to fundamentally recalculate their strategic posture before these systems achieve full operational deployment status across hardened launch facilities that are already prepared and waiting. The United States is frozen, completely, totally, and absolutely paralyzed at every level of strategic decision-making architecture. The Pentagon is running scenario after scenario, and every single model terminates in outcomes so catastrophic, so destabilizing to global order, and so beyond acceptable risk parameters that no options are being presented to civilian leadership, because there are no options that do not lead to either complete strategic capitulation or escalation trajectories that end in thermonuclear exchange. Washington's entire Middle Eastern security framework, built over generations of diplomatic engineering and military positioning, has collapsed in a single night because the fundamental assumption underlying that framework, that overwhelming American power projection could deter adversary escalation, no longer corresponds to reality. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this event. The technical capabilities that have just been transferred and why they render existing defensive systems meaningless. The operational implications for Israeli security and why 48 hours is not hyperbole but calculated strategic timeline. The American paralysis and why Washington cannot respond without triggering scenarios that dwarf anything we have seen since 1962. The Russian strategic calculus and why Moscow chose this exact moment to execute the most destabilizing weapons transfer in modern history. And the global order implications, because what happened tonight is not a Middle Eastern crisis. It is the permanent end of the unipolar moment and the beginning of something entirely different. The Topol-M system, designated SS-27 Sickle B under NATO reporting nomenclature, represents the most advanced road-mobile ICBM platform in the Russian Strategic Rocket Forces arsenal. This is not Soviet-era hardware being dumped on export markets. This is current-generation Russian strategic deterrent capability that achieved initial operational capability in the Russian military less than 2 decades ago and remains in active frontline deployment, protecting Moscow's most critical retaliatory strike capabilities. The missile itself is a 3-stage solid fuel system with a launch weight of 47 metric tons and throw weight capacity of 1,000 kilograms. Maximum range exceeds 11,000 kilometers, placing every capital city in Europe, every military installation in the Middle East, and strategic targets as far as the eastern seaboard of the United States within engagement envelope when launched from Iranian territory. Terminal velocity in the re-entry phase exceeds Mach 20, creating intercept geometry problems that render every existing missile defense system in the region essentially decorative. But the real strategic nightmare is not the range or the speed. It is the penetration aids package and the maneuvering re-entry vehicle capability. The Topol-M was designed from first principles to defeat American missile defense systems. The re-entry vehicle executes terminal phase maneuvers that create lateral displacement of several kilometers while maintaining hypersonic velocity, destroying the predictable trajectory assumptions that every intercept algorithm depends upon. The system deploys sophisticated decoys, chaff clouds, and electronic countermeasures that create radar signature multiplication, forcing defensive systems to attempt simultaneous tracking of dozens of apparent targets when only one is real. Every metric that matters in strategic missile capability favors the Topol-M against everything Israel has deployed for defense. The Arrow-3 system, which represents the highest tier of Israeli ballistic missile defense and which has been optimized against Iranian Shahab and Sejil-class missiles, was never designed to engage maneuvering re-entry vehicles at hypersonic velocity. Arrow-3 intercept probability against non-maneuvering targets operating on predictable trajectories is estimated at 70 to 80% under ideal conditions. Against a maneuvering Topol-M re-entry vehicle executing lateral displacement at Mach 20+ in the terminal phase, intercept probability degrades to below 20% even if every system parameter functions perfectly. And Israel does not have 70 Arrow-3 interceptors to waste on 20% probability shots. The entire Israeli strategic defense interceptor inventory across all systems, Arrow-2, Arrow-3, David's Sling, and Iron Dome, totals fewer than 2,000 missiles. Iran has just received 500 launch platforms, each capable of carrying multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles if configured for MARVed operations. The mathematics are not complicated. If Iran chooses to employ even a fraction of this capability in saturation attack profile, Israeli defensive architecture will be overwhelmed within the first 30 minutes of engagement. The interceptors will be exhausted long before the incoming threats are neutralized. Cost-exchange ratios make the strategic impossibility even more obvious. Each Arrow-3 interceptor costs approximately $3 million. Each Topol-M missile costs approximately $20 million in Russian domestic production pricing, but delivers strategic effect worth orders of magnitude more through its ability to hold hardened strategic infrastructure at risk. Iran can afford to expend multiple Topol-M missiles against critical Israeli command bunkers, nuclear facilities, and strategic infrastructure because the value of those targets exceeds the cost of the weapons by factors of hundreds or thousands. Israel cannot afford to expend multiple $3 million interceptors against every incoming threat because the interceptor inventory will be depleted before the threat stream is exhausted. The operational implications cascade across every dimension of Israeli military planning and strategic deterrence posture. For decades, Israeli security has rested on the assumption of overwhelming qualitative military edge, combined with strategic ambiguity regarding second strike nuclear capabilities. That entire framework has been destroyed in a single night because both elements of the equation have been fundamentally altered. The qualitative military edge no longer exists when the adversary possesses 500 road-mobile ICBMs that can be dispersed across Iranian territory in launch configurations that make preemptive targeting functionally impossible. Israeli Air Force strike packages cannot reach, identify, and destroy 500 mobile launchers dispersed across a nation the size of Iran before those systems achieve launch. The distances are too great, the targets too numerous, the defensive environments too sophisticated, and the operational timelines too compressed. Any attempt at preemptive strike would fail catastrophically, triggering the very catastrophic exchange it was meant to prevent while destroying what remains of Israeli Air Force offensive capability in the attempt. The strategic ambiguity regarding Israeli nuclear deterrent is rendered meaningless when Iran possesses delivery systems in such quantity that Israeli second strike capability becomes irrelevant to strategic calculus. Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal, estimated at 80 to 200 warheads, was meant to serve as ultimate deterrent against existential threats through the implicit promise that any attempt to destroy Israel would result in devastating retaliation against adversary cities and strategic infrastructure. But deterrence only functions when the threatened retaliation is perceived as intolerable cost exceeding any possible gain from aggression. Iran has just demonstrated that it possesses strategic delivery capability in such overwhelming quantity that Israeli retaliation becomes absorbed cost rather than intolerable price. If Iran is willing to accept the destruction of 20 or 30 cities in exchange for the permanent elimination of Israel as strategic competitor and the demonstration to the entire Islamic world that resistance can triumph over Zionist occupation, then Israeli nuclear deterrence has failed. The weapons still exist. The silos and submarines still function. But the strategic effect, the psychological impact that prevents adversaries from contemplating existential aggression has evaporated because the cost-benefit calculation has fundamentally changed. The 48-hour timeline that Iran has communicated to Israeli leadership is not arbitrary diplomatic theater. It is operationally calculated based on the time required to complete final deployment dispersal of the Topol-M systems into hardened and camouflaged launch positions across Iranian territory. Intelligence assessments indicate that approximately 60% of the transferred systems are already in field deployment, with the remaining 40% in final staging areas undergoing last integration checks and crew familiarization training. 48 hours represents the maximum window during which Israeli leadership could theoretically order preemptive strike operations with any chance of destroying significant portions of the Topol-M inventory before those systems achieve fully dispersed operational deployment status in locations that make targeting impossible. After that window closes, the systems will be scattered across thousands of square kilometers of Iranian territory in mobile configurations that can relocate every few hours, making satellite tracking ineffective and strike planning impossible. But the 48-hour window is not a real opportunity. It is psychological warfare dressed as diplomatic communication. Iran knows that Israel cannot execute effective preemptive strike operations against the Topol-M inventory even with the systems partially concentrated. The operational requirements for such a strike exceed Israeli Air Force capability by orders of magnitude. The distances, the numbers, the defensive environments, and the coordination demands make success impossible and catastrophic failure certain. So, why communicate the 48-hour timeline if the opportunity it supposedly represents is actually impossible to exploit? Because the communication is designed to force Israeli leadership to publicly acknowledge their strategic impotence. Every hour that passes without Israeli military response reinforces the reality that Israel cannot act, cannot respond, and cannot prevent Iran from achieving permanent strategic overmatch. The timeline is not an ultimatum. It is a countdown to the moment when Israeli deterrence dies not through military defeat, but through demonstrated paralysis. If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge official narratives, subscribe now to ensure you never miss an update. The mainstream defense commentary is still pretending that diplomatic solutions exist or that American security guarantees remain credible. This channel tells you what is actually happening behind the official statements and carefully managed press briefings. Washington is discovering that superpower status means nothing when the strategic realities on the ground have shifted beyond the capacity of American power projection to influence outcomes without accepting costs that no political leadership can authorize. The United States maintains overwhelming conventional military superiority in almost every measurable category. Carrier strike groups, stealth aircraft, precision strike capabilities, satellite surveillance architecture, and global logistics networks all remain vastly superior to anything Iran or Russia can deploy. But none of that superiority matters when employment of those capabilities triggers escalation sequences that lead directly to strategic exchange between nuclear powers. The United States could theoretically destroy every Topol-M system that Iran has received through massive aerial campaign involving hundreds of strike sorties, cruise missile bombardment, and special operations direct action against high-value targets. American technical capability to execute such operations is not in question. What is in question is whether American political leadership is willing to accept the consequences of such operations, and the answer is unambiguously no. Any American military strike against Iranian Topol-M deployments would be interpreted by Moscow as attack on Russian strategic assets because these are Russian missiles transferred under Russian strategic calculus. Moscow has made explicitly clear through multiple diplomatic and military channels that any American military action against these systems will be treated as equivalent to direct attack on Russian strategic rocket forces, triggering immediate response protocols that include strategic weapons employment options. The United States is not going to risk strategic nuclear exchange with Russia over Iranian missile capabilities, regardless of what implications those capabilities have for Israeli security or regional stability. The calculus is brutal but simple. Israel is not worth gambling American cities. American political leadership will issue strong statements, promise continued support, and maintain official security commitments. But when the actual decision point arrives and the choice is between accepting Iranian strategic capability or risking nuclear war with Russia, there is no choice. America will accept Iranian capability and manage Israeli disappointment through diplomatic language and financial compensation. This is the death of American security guarantees in real time. Every ally watching these events understands that Washington's promises are only credible when honoring them does not require accepting costs that exceed American willingness to pay. When the costs become genuinely existential, when the choice is American cities versus Allied security, American leadership will choose American survival and call it strategic realism. Russia chose this exact moment to execute this transfer for reasons that have nothing to do with Iranian requests and everything to do with Russian strategic objectives in global competition with American hegemony. Moscow has been seeking opportunities to demonstrate that American power projection has limits, that allies cannot rely on American security guarantees when genuinely tested, and that challenging American preferences in regional conflicts will not automatically trigger overwhelming American response. The Topol-M transfer to Iran accomplishes all those strategic objectives simultaneously, while creating additional benefits for Russian interests across multiple theaters. Every percentage point of American strategic attention consumed by this Middle Eastern crisis is a percentage point not applied to Ukraine, not applied to NATO's eastern flank, not applied to Pacific deterrence posture, creating pressure relief across every theater where Russia faces American-backed opposition. The transfer also serves Russian interests by demonstrating to potential arms customers across the global south that Russia can and will provide strategic capabilities that fundamentally alter regional balances of power, unlike Western arms transfers, which always come with restrictions, conditions, and limitations designed to prevent recipient nations from achieving genuine strategic autonomy. Iran has just received capability that allows it to permanently escape subordination to Western military pressure. Every nation in the developing world watching these events understands the implication. Partnership with Russia can provide genuine sovereignty. Partnership with Washington provides managed dependence. China is watching these events with enormous strategic satisfaction because every demonstration of American paralysis and Allied abandonment strengthens the Chinese argument to Asian nations that American security commitments are unreliable and that accommodation with Beijing is strategic necessity. The message to Taiwan, to Japan, to South Korea, and to the Philippines is identical. When genuine crisis arrives, when the costs of defending you become truly existential for Washington, America will choose its own survival and leave you to negotiate your own terms with regional powers. Start negotiating now while you still have leverage. The Global South is interpreting these events as definitive proof that the unipolar moment is over and that genuine multipolarity has arrived. For decades, developing nations have resented American ability to enforce compliance through threats of military intervention, economic sanctions, and diplomatic isolation. The Topol-M transfer demonstrates that coordinated resistance by major powers can successfully defy American preferences without triggering the devastating consequences that were supposed those to make such defiance unthinkable. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. Tonight, history did not merely turn a page. It slammed the entire book shut and set it on fire. What you have just heard explained is the permanent end of the security architecture that has governed the Middle East since 1979. Iran has achieved strategic capability that cannot be reversed, cannot be defended against, and cannot be ignored. Israel faces existential decisions with no good options. America has been revealed as superpower in name only when the costs of action exceed political willingness to pay. The 48 hours are counting down not toward Israeli decision, but toward the moment when the entire world acknowledges what has already occurred. The regional balance has shifted permanently. The rules that govern great power competition have been rewritten. The assumptions that made American hegemony seem inevitable have been destroyed. There is no going back. There is no diplomatic solution that restores the previous order. There is only the new reality and the question of how quickly everyone adjusts to facts that can no longer be changed. Has this night permanently altered Middle Eastern power balance, or will Washington find a way to reassert dominance? Leave your assessment in the comments. Your engagement keeps this work independent and sharp. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter.